Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the 12th day of July, in the year of our Lord 2024. I will be talking about the ordeal of Julian Assange, but also what his case tells us about what it means to be a real journalist in today's world. In essence, his case tells us that the truth no longer sets us free. Telling the truth has become a crime. Before we get into the matter of Assange, perhaps a little background is in order. A free press is vitally important to American freedom, and if I can convey nothing else to you today, it is that the press, and by that I mean real, genuine journalism, is there to inform the people of what their government is doing. Those in government should be looking out for and expecting the press to expose their works of darkness if they have any. That sentiment has been spoken by many, from the founders all the way to the Supreme Court in the modern era. I will illustrate my words with a quote from Justice Hugo Black in the case of New York Times versus the United States, decided in 1971. This quote came to me from an article written by Scott Ritter in his newsletter, Scott Ritter Extra. Quote, "The press was to serve the governed, not the governors. The government's power to censor the press was abolished so that the press would remain forever free to censor the government. The press was protected so that it could bear the secrets of the government and inform the people. Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose the deception in government, and paramount among the responsibilities of a free press is the duty to prevent any part of the government from deceiving the people and sending them off to distant lands to die of foreign fevers, foreign shot and shell," end quote. That quote is one of the most important in American history because it's fundamental to liberty. The press is supposed to be the servant of the people, not a wholly owned subsidiary of the government itself, and certainly not of any one political party. The case quoting Justice Black goes back to the Vietnam days of Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers. Ellsberg was not a journalist, but an employee of the U.S. Department of Defense working in the Pentagon. He was involved in the production of a report ordered to be prepared by Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. That was a history of U.S. involvement in Vietnam from 1945 to 1968. The Times printed the report on its front pages and further stated that the report showed that the Johnson administration had lied systemically to Congress and to the American people about U.S. entry into and conduct of the Vietnam War. McNamara claimed that he only had the report prepared because he wanted to leave a written record for future policymakers to prevent them from making the same mistakes. The report revealed lots of things the government was lying about, including U.S. troops raiding into North Vietnam, so on and so forth. The optimistic picture of the war presented by the government was false. The government knew the war was unwinnable and a waste of lives and resources. It was top secret information. Although Ellsberg was not a journalist, he was disturbed by the report and he violated his security clearance by sending it to the New York Times, who then chose to publish it on their front pages. I lived through that time, so I remember it very well. It was not happy. I was not happy that Ellsberg released classified information, and I wanted to see him punished. I admit now that I really didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand what was at stake. Ellsberg sent the information to the New York Times, but that paper made the decision on its own to publish it. The Times was perhaps not an affiliate of the Democrat Party as it is now. Also, the Times, along with other media, were genuinely hostile to the war, happy to see it discredited. President Johnson was a lame duck. He was on his way out. Robert Kennedy was expected to be his successor. Julian Assange is in many ways the opposite of Daniel Ellsberg in that he didn't steal any government top-secret documents and release them to the media. Assange was, in fact, the media, because he was the founder of the internet site WikiLeaks, which endeavored to hold government accountable by revealing its secrets to the people. People sent him information that they had obtained, and he decided whether to put it out on WikiLeaks or not. He received a video that was obtained by a U.S. Army corporal consisting of gun camera footage shot from a U.S. helicopter. When he saw the video, he knew that it was dynamite and potentially could bring severe retaliation against him if he published. The video showed a helicopter crew being ordered to fire on civilians huddled together on the ground. 9 civilians huddled together in the street. The machine gunner in the helicopter reported them as civilians, but an order clearly given to him, clearly heard on the audio, was, quote, "Light them all up," end quote. There was hesitation on the gunner's part, and then the order came, "Come on, fire." The people all went down. They were all dead but one. He was killed as he was running away. That is pretty obviously an international war crime. Very graphic for those who saw it. Few, if any, outside those involved knew of it until Assange decided to publish it on WikiLeaks, and that decision sealed his fate. The U.S. came after him for espionage and treason, although they never explained how a foreign national can be guilty of treason. Assange is Australian, and the crime of treason can be committed only against one's own government. Especially, espionage was enough. However, to have him relentlessly pursued until his life was destroyed. He was living in London at the time. He was granted asylum by the nation of Ecuador in their British embassy, where he remained for 7 years. He actually lived inside that building for 7 years. His wife was unable to see him during that time. During that 7 years, the president of Ecuador, who had granted asylum, was replaced by one who was more susceptible to American pressure. He was handed over to British authorities, who put him in Belmarsh maximum security prison, while his lawyers fought American requests to have him extradited to the U.S., where he would have faced long-term imprisonment. He spent 5 years in Belmarsh maximum security prison, most of it in solitary confinement, in a cell 23 hours a day. Keep in mind, he was not a criminal, had not been convicted of anything. He had no real due process for 12 years because he knew his American fate had already been decided. I said that Assange was the opposite of Daniel Ellsberg, and that is because he was the New York Times, not Ellsberg. The U.S. went after Ellsberg at first for espionage, but later thought better of it, left him alone. The New York Times, in the case I mentioned, proved that free press was alive then, still alive despite the government's best efforts. Assange was the New York Times because he was the publisher of the information. Can you imagine the publisher or editor of the New York Times being confined for 12 years without any charges? The government wanted to make an example of the only one who had the audacity to practice real journalism, living in a tiny cell 23 hours a day for 5 years. Is, according to the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights, a crime that cannot be justified because it imposes severe mental pain and suffering beyond any reasonable retribution for criminal behavior, and thus constitutes torture. Before someone is so confined in solitary, he should be at least charged with a crime, perhaps even be guilty of one. In Assange's case, the state won, and the state let everyone know that it claims the right to conduct its war crimes and other such deeds in total darkness, and the light of day will not shine on it. If you think otherwise, then take a look at Julian Assange and be afraid. The state sends this message to all would-be journalists out in the working press, those in journalism schools. We are everything, you are nothing. We are superior, we are exceptional. We are morally correct, and our ends justify any means, so don't think about opposing us. If you try to oppose us, you will be ostracized by your fellow journalists, and that will be the least of your troubles. Just come on and join us. Join us like all your comrades. Just spit out the propaganda as we give it to you, and your life will be one of ease. In Julian Assange's case, he is guilty of no crime, but they won. They won because they broke him after 12 years. The news of his release was met with joy, but then I started thinking about what it really means. He won his freedom, but to do so, he had to compromise and plead guilty to a crime he didn't commit. The state made him say He was guilty, that he's sorry about his guilt. He was forced to acknowledge that what he did was a crime, and so lying became the price of his freedom. The government doesn't think anything about lying and has become a master at it, so making him lie is no big deal to them. Anybody who says anything the U.S. government doesn't want him to say is in danger. You could be arrested, thrown into prison for years, no charges, no trial. His attorneys were finally able to negotiate a plea deal whereby he pled guilty to one felony charge of illegally obtaining and publishing U.S. government documents of various kinds, many of them evidencing war crimes, crimes of human abuse. A few others exposed some political crimes during the Clinton campaign. His plea deal justifies the government's history of abusing his rights, along with the denial of press freedom, because, after all, he was guilty of espionage. One interesting thing about the plea deal is the choice of locations. There is a federal courthouse on the island of Saipan in the Northern Marianas, a U.S. possession. The reason that island is a U.S. possession is because a few thousand U.S. Marines paid for it with their lives in June of 1944. That's right, folks. We just memorialized the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings in France, but just 1 week after that, on June 15, 1944, U.S. Marines landed on Saipan in what was the largest Pacific landing to that date. The U.S. was so powerful it could conduct two of the largest amphibious assaults in world history on opposite sides of the world at virtually the same time. So now I must ask you, what happened? What's become of us? What caused all this? Apparently, it was Assange's lawyers who wanted that location because it was under U.S. jurisdiction, but not in the U.S. It is fairly remote, but also fairly close to his native Australia. I saw a video of him seeing his wife, who waited all those years for him. He didn't want to set foot on U.S. soil, that bastion of liberty that so many were willing to die for in 1944. If he had landed in Washington, there would have been no way to prevent the government from reneging on the deal they offered him and bringing him to trial in Washington, D.C. It's a shame that his lawyers had good reason to think that a fair trial was not possible for him. The New York Times shied away from the Assange story for much of the ordeal, but finally published an article entitled, quote, "Assange agrees to plead guilty in exchange for release, ending standoff with the U.S., end quote. The best I can make of the deal is that he is free. That's good. What it means in a bad sense is an overturning of the case of New York Times versus the U.S. It is an assault on the First Amendment and on the concept of the First Amendment as a guardian of a free press and the vital importance of a free press. So, Julian is free, but the press is not. Finally, folks, are there any people left who still practice real journalism? Yes. Yes, maybe a few, because although Julian is free, he can't work anymore, at least not without extreme risk. Some others, perhaps, definitely Tucker Carlson, definitely Glenn Greenwald, definitely Matt Taibbi. Perhaps I would include Barry Weiss in that list as well. At least that's the way I see it, folks. Until next time, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.